Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part there for the 27th of January 2024. Let's get straight to our first segment, the military aid and equipment section. We start with the EU is set to approve 50 billion euros in aid to Ukraine next week, according to the Latvian president. This has been on the cards for a long time. There is talk about Hungary being the difficult one here. You know, Hungary may be stripped of its voting rights if in the EU, if Orban blocks the $50 billion aid package for Ukraine. That's according to Politico yesterday, and that's what we know is one of the things being held over Viktor Orban, but set to approve it, as according to some sources. On the other hand, Hungary complicates negotiations on 50 billion euros EU package to Ukraine, according to Reuters. According to the publication, even after Orban's statement on lifting the veto, Hungary still refuses to agree on aid to Kyiv. I presume that's lifting on the veto for EU accession talks. So anyway, Viktor Orban being difficult there, but there's a few things that the EU can do to persuade him, should we say, to give aid to Ukraine. That will be taking place imminently by the looks of it. And goodness me, with the impasse in Congress at the moment looking like it's not going to go anywhere, although there is movement there, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. This aid from the EU is all the more important. The EU plans to allocate 5 billion euros in military aid to Ukraine in the coming days, according to EU diplomat Joseph Borrell. So I presume this is some other thing aside from that $50 billion, maybe just in case a $50 billion thing goes awry. The EU has at least some stopgap there. Ukraine needs everything it can get, particularly, as we know, ammunition. An agreement on funding for Ukraine in the US Senate is under threat, according to The Guardian. So this is then going to the US. According to the newspaper, negotiations on the crucial border security agreement necessary for further aid to Ukraine are at risk. Quote, "We are at a critical moment and we must make every effort to make a decision. If we can't do that, we'll go to plan B, at least for now. There are still attempts to reach a solution that would satisfy many Republicans," said Republican Senator John Thune to reporters. Now, what's interesting about that quote from a Republican senator is there is a plan B at least. Don't know what that is. I don't know if that's a plan B with regard to border deals or a plan B with regard to Ukraine aid. It would be great if the US does have things up its sleeve for Ukraine aid. Yeah, so that is looking... It's looking dicey still at the moment, but we'll sort of talk about that in the geopolitical section. Let's go now to the Ramstein meeting that took place this week. And US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin emphasized that the US, as well as the entire international coalition, remain committed to supporting Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression. However, at that Ramstein meeting, it's the first meeting that the US has gone to, and it's been unable to present anything in terms of aid to Ukraine. So yes, the rhetoric is there, but the actions need to obviously back up the rhetoric. Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen arrived in Ukraine on a visit. He announced financial support to fight corruption in Ukraine worth $8.75 million as part of the EU anti-corruption program. Good news there. Ukraine and Denmark will jointly hold a Ukrainian-Danish defense industry forum with a focus on drone production, according to Ukraine's foreign ministry. Quote, "We will focus on the development of joint projects for the production of drones, taking into account Denmark's special capabilities in this area," said Dmytro Kuleba, the Ukrainian foreign minister. This is, I guess, on top of lots of other drone initiatives with other countries. I don't know whether this is part of the drone coalition that's being run. Is it Latvia that's in charge of that? Or whether this is just a purely bilateral one. We know that the UK is involved in a £200 million initiative for drones between the UK and Ukraine. There's a lot of expertise swapping going on, and you've got to remember that Ukraine is a very useful test bed for international partners to say, right, you can think, right, we say Britain, for example, right, in the UK, we need to sort out drone capability for our armed forces going forward. This is an incredibly important area of the armed forces. And as we can see in Ukraine, this is what we need. Well, how do you do that best? How do you best provide what the UK might need for drones for Army, Air Force and Navy? Will you go to Ukraine and say, hang on, can we work with you to do this? And that will help you and will help bring our expertise to the table and our money to the table. And you can help with your on the field expertise. It's all about this feedback loop in design and production, performance feedback revisions like evolution, performance feedback revision. You need that all the time to improve. Well, if the UK wants the best it can get for the money it can afford, then it's probably best off getting into a deal, a partnership with Ukraine. And that works for our military strategic, foreign policy ideals, in terms of assisting Ukraine, but actually it also really assists the UK. So as I keep mentioning to you guys, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Countries are helping Ukraine because it's in their own best interests. Here it is, we are helping you with a drone initiative, but actually we get out of that we get really good info, really good data back on how best to use drones and what drone capabilities we need by working with an ally who is at war in what is ostensibly becoming a drone war. Right, the IT coalition expands with the Netherlands joining, contributing €10 million. The coalition supporting Ukraine's defence in IT, communication and cybersecurity includes 12 countries. Denmark also allocates over €12 million for Ukrainian cybersecurity in the coalition. So Denmark, those last three things, Denmark stepping up. Denmark, if you look as a percentage of GDP, Denmark are right up there as far as I remember. So, I will be starting another band, Danish Love. And considering two of my favorite TV programs ever involved Denmark. So the Bridge, which is a Danish-Swedish 3-series program, which is just absolutely superb. But also Borgen. I mean, who can't love Borgen? Borgen is just an amazing TV show. It's basically The West Wing, but in Denmark. It's just absolutely brilliant. Anyway, Danish Love. First gig next week. Not. Right, Ukrainian drone delivers a mine barrier made of linked TM62 anti-tank mines somewhere at the front. This is quite incredible. Let's just get this full screen for you. This is a good use of UGVs, unmanned ground vehicles. It is a good old... listen to the explosions going off in the background, by the way. So this is a UGV pulling a whole very long line of linked mines, which I presume means that one mine goes off, they all go off, or could just be physically linked. But listen to that sound, those sounds. This is such a long line of mines, and these are going to be fairly heavy, also giving quite a lot of resistance there as they're dragged across the ground. It just goes to show how powerful some of these drones that they're producing are. Now, new Ukrainian underwater drone project to dominate the Black Sea, according to Naval News. Project Fury, first Ukrainian robotic navy. That's a very cool acronym there, which will... I love acronym creators, because it's like, I love this word. Let's shoehorn in something that makes sense within the word. Like, it'd be like Project Badger, right? How can we make Badger? BAD, badass army, dangerous guns, with electronic robots. Yeah, right. Now let's start a project. Now that I've got the name, let's start. Obviously, I'm being silly. Anyway. Project Fury, which will be present at... Sorry, I've just got badges on my mind now. At Offensive of Machines Hackathon on January 28th, is looking at the natural evolution of the uncrewed battle, says Max23. And indeed, Euromaidan Press reports on this. Ukraine unveils a Fury, a new weapon to dominate Black Sea. Ukraine is developing a new underwater drone project, aims to destroy the Russian Navy in the Black Sea, particularly underwater. I've been talking about previously how there are plans afoot for things like torpedoes that are basically drones that can shoot out to, say, the port of Sevastopol and then hang outside the port until they need to be kicked into gear. So, you know, if you can have a torpedo that just sits there submerged for maybe 2 weeks before the right ship comes out, and then poof, it goes and hits. That's the kind of capability that I think Ukraine would really like. According to the Russians, Ukrainians have started using large drone motherships, something we have heard about and I've reported on before, which can carry around 10 first-person view drones to an area, significantly increasing their range. So if you think a drone has got 10-kilometer range, or maybe even one of these ones that can now go up to 20 kilometers, and you're using a big octocopter and that has 10 of those drones on them, and you're flying that 10 kilometers, then dropping the drones off that can go another 20 kilometers, then that's 30 kilometers of drone. And then the larger octocopter will act probably as a relay for the signal to these smaller drones. So this is something that is being used. So War Translated here says the Russian serviceman was apparently a witness of a flock of Ukrainian FPV drones led by a repeater drone Queen, which had descended onto Russian positions and started the bombing. Goodness me. Yeah, FPV, yes, FPV, he says. A flock of around 10. I'll turn that. The Queen is somewhere above at high altitude in a small detection range. He says it brings a flock of drones which then descend onto positions and start working. I was hoping for a little bit more detail there, but yeah, so that is really good capability for the Ukrainians to have. Of course, it's always a worry when, as soon as one side has something, you know, the other side is going to be working their damnedest to make sure they get that capability as well as soon as possible. This is an anti-drone system that is crucial to protect, I mean, both sides. We had, remember, guns that looked a little bit like this that were given to the Russian police in Moscow after Moscow started getting hit by drones all that time back, and there were claims that these drone guns were more dangerous for the policemen's testicles than they were for the drones themselves. But anyway, so these are anti-drone pieces of kit crucial to protect the defenders from enemy drone attacks. Soon enough, some Russian drones will start dropping from the skies. Thanks to you, portable anti-drone systems delivered for Brevi. I'm not sure what that project or company is, but good to see those finding their way to the front line. Now, German aid to Ukraine gives another corrective. Always good to see accuracy being at the forefront for someone like GAU here. I would like to point out that many accounts have reported today, so it was yesterday and I was one of them, that the German MOD had announced a new aid package for Ukraine. And if you remember at the time, I said, this is a bit weird because that looks like stuff that's already been promised. It was a Leopard 105s. I said, I think that's already part of the stuff that's already been promised. So this wasn't new stuff. And this is what he says. Unfortunately, this claim bears no relation to reality. The only thing the German MOD did 2 days ago was to once again list pledged military aid that has been known for many months, partly for over a year. That's it. The only thing that was new, and I also reported on this 2 days ago, was the increase in military artillery ammunition, to be delivered, and the announcement of the exact quantity of Leopard 105s and protected vehicles to be delivered. Perhaps a number of logistics vehicles, but even those are actually self-evident, as Germany also has delivered over 400 logistics vehicles in 2023. Please don't spread the word that there's a new aid package. It's perfectly fine to summarize once again what we are planning, because not everyone uses me, for example, as a source and is therefore almost very up to date. But please don't package it in such a way that the MOD has announced a new delivery. That only harms us, and that's a point well taken. And I have found, in fact, with my last conversation, I think, with GAU, I talked about the problem of there being so many accounts that report that, and you kind of double up on stuff, but also there is often the case that the Germans announce something and pledge it, and then it gets re-announced as they deliver it. And sometimes you think, well, those are two separate packages. Actually, it's one that was promised and then the announcement of delivery, and you think that actually there's more than they really get. So we need to be careful with that. And I should make sure I go to GIU for all my German news, really. Visual confirmation that Leopard 105s in Ukrainian service have been equipped with 105mm M1040 canister rounds, effectively a 105mm shotgun shell supporting several hundred tungsten balls. Seen below, it is a firing of its slightly larger brother, the M1028 there. So, in other words, the Leopard 105s in Ukrainian servers have been equipped with this. That's not to say this is them firing, but this is what they look like. I'll just put that on silent. Now, interestingly, I watched. This is obviously very good for anti-personnel. I don't know how much that ripped through equipment as well, but I was watching a new, what's it called, a Redback, the new Korean designed and manufactured infantry fighting vehicle, basically like the Bradley, for the Australians. That's why it's called a Redback. And it had, as far as I could work out, I don't know if it's autonomous, but it had the ability to fire rounds like this out of its out of the cannon on top. So not so much an artillery round, but out the infantry fighting vehicle. And there was successive like airburst rounds or burst rounds like this fired against targets. And I'm fairly sure it's all autonomous as well. So, technology is moving apace, isn't it? Right. French aid to Ukraine, another worthy of following source here, saying the French senator warned that France and the EU countries are not living up to Ukraine's expectations. The French Senate will launch hearings on the production of 155mm shells to understand why the production isn't still taking off, despite calls to produce more for more than 18 months. It is against the EU Commission's proposal to refinance the EPF. So the EPF is this kind of like, you give stuff from your stocks to Ukraine and we'll pay you to build up your own stocks, which intended to reimburse EU countries for arms supply to Ukraine in the amount of 20 billion euros for 4 years. The EPF allowed EU members to send their Soviet arms to Ukraine and be partially reimbursed to buy new ones. Germany believes that this fund shouldn't exist because stocks are now empty. Calls for the maintenance of the collective support mechanism, emphasizing that without it, many EU countries will no longer have any incentive to help. In other words, if you've like emptied your stocks, you don't need this fund to replenish your stocks, essentially because there isn't a production there. So I think the way I understand it is, why aren't we producing more? Essentially, what it comes down to, as it says here, despite calls to produce more for more than 18 months, this senator doesn't, or the French Senate doesn't understand why production still hasn't taken off. That's obviously in the French context. It might be different for other countries. As Anton Goroshchenko here says, as Moscow ramps up weapons production, NATO is still struggling to keep up. This is coming from Daily Telegraph, and it's been reported by a number of different people as well, adding that in 3 years' time, Russia could gain decisive superiority on the battlefield. This is like painting a bit of doom and gloom here. The main points from the article: Russia is converting former shopping malls, bakeries, and other civilian infrastructure into weapons factories. So that's a Lancet manufacturing facility appears to now be in an old shopping mall. Russia has increased military expenditures from 2.7% of GDP in 2022 to 6%, or approximately 1/3 of all state expenditures in 2024. By this measure, Russia has surpassed all major NATO countries. In 2023, Russia produced 1,530 tanks and 2,518 armoured fighting vehicles. This means a 560% increase in tank production since February 2022. IFV's infantry fighting vehicles production is up 360%, and APC armoured personnel carrier production up 350%. Now, there's a lot of questions to be asked about that data and whether it's production or refurbishment and repair even. So, don't be so sure that they are producing that many brand new pieces of kit. Russian Federation is approaching production of 2 million artillery shells per year, twice as much as Western intelligence services originally estimated. For comparison, all European production during the first year of the war in Ukraine amounted to 300,000 shells. This should include supplies of shells, missiles and drones from Iran and North Korea. So far, the level of production is unlikely to allow Russia to launch a major offensive in 2024. However, the Kremlin, according to the newspaper's source, plans to reach its goal in 3 years. Quote, they are talking about mobilizing their defense industry over the next 3 years, which implies they're looking to fight for this war for at least 3 to 4 years. This is exactly what I talked about yesterday, partly referring to the article that actually what matters is the relative production, as much as each individual nation. So, if Russia is kept still back to like 2 million shells a year, yeah, that might be better than they're expecting, but it's way, way off what they still need so my positive outlook is that actually, what Russia has been able to ramp up in terms of artillery shell production is not enough. They were firing 60,000 shells a day at the peak of the war. Some say it could be 40,000, 40 to 60,000. At the moment, they're 10,000 based on what their production schedules are. So they're a sixth off what they were, and that is not looking like they're going to get back to where they need to be in terms of when they had all those stockpiles at the beginning of the war and the fire rate that they had. So that is still a challenge for Russia. However, that's okay for Russia if Ukraine are way behind. But if Ukraine are, I don't know, let's guess at say 1 million shells a day, you are getting a 2-to-1 ratio. That is looking like that's where it's going to be. There aren't these huge stockpiles. Let's assume there's no big stockpiles, there's no change. It's like a 2-to-1 ratio. That's actually way better than Ukraine at the beginning of the war. So what was it? 60,000 for Russia and like something like 7,000 for Ukraine. Well, it should have had to have been 14,000 to 7,000 to be what the equivalent is sort of now or going forward in the next year. So even though this paints a really negative picture, it's actually way better than where Ukraine were at. And look how well Ukraine have done since then, relatively speaking. So, yes, this is a challenge for the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians need to ramp up their production, or allies do. But actually, it's moving in the right direction, and that's not enough for Russia. Now, looking at self-propelled guns, self-propelled howitzers, big, cannons on tracks, the SPG stock for the 120th Arsenal at Bryansk, and mostly musters were pulled out or were cannibalized, according to my previous post. This is a time lapse from October 2021 to April 2023. So this is almost a year out of date still, right? These images, but it's just worth looking at these. So I presume, let's have a look. Let's make this bigger so that we can see the date, because I think, is the date not on this? Oh, no, it's not. I thought the date was on this. So this is in October 2021, one presumes, because it's all very neatly arranged, because there's no access to this. It's just there for what I think the understanding is there's this agreement with the US, or it could be with NATO, where Russia has all their stuff and it's very much out in the open so that it can be looked at by satellites and so that it can be counted. And indeed, NATO members would go around the Russian storage facilities and count up how much they have in order, some kind of military agreement. And likewise, Russian people would be going around like UK stores and American stores. So it gets, I forget exactly why. I remember Don Nichols from Ukraine the Latest podcast talking about this, but he said it ended up becoming more of a jolly. It's just a way of actually getting the forces to integrate and sit down and have drinks and food and these meetings with your Russian counterparts, and it's a way of making relations better. But there is this idea that these are kind of on display so that they can be counted, partly in some kind of agreement. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. Nonetheless, then we come to later, and people can count up how much stuff has been cannibalized and the movement, everything, and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure how much this tells us, but there is an awful lot of equipment lying around in Russia that is in varying states of disrepair, and it's very difficult to know for sure what's going on, like how many of these bits of kit are usable or cannibalizable so that they can keep replacing their losses. And when we look at the attrition rates every morning, when I tell you how much stuff the Russians have lost and you think, oh my God, how can they sustain losing that many bits of kit, that many artillery pieces in a day? And then you look at these, and this is just one of many, many sites. This one's in Bryansk, and you're thinking, okay, that's why they've been able to lose thousands upon thousands, because they are able to replace them, or at least the barrels, and if not replace them entirely, then take bits from them. But again, that is still just a finite number of pieces. How long will that last? Now, I reported previously that South Africa appeared to be giving arms to Russia when a Russian naval ship did random practice moves out in the sea near South Africa with the South African Navy, and then came into port, and then at night time and under the cover of not just the darkness, but I think there were loads of there was loads of secrecy and you couldn't see what was going on. They loaded a ship up and then it went back to Russia, and you're like, that wasn't just a naval maneuver, that wasn't training, that was you guys going to South Africa to get some kit. So South Africa has supplied arms to Russia. Remember, they're part of BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And now the US Ambassador Ruben Brigitte has said that South Africa has supplied arms to Russia. That's obviously not cool, South Africa. Okay, I'm splitting up this video into two, the military aid and geopolitical stuff, because it went on way too long. So look out for the next one that will come out a little bit later. Thanks so much. Take care. Speak soon.